There's a man the world thinks it knows. They know his face from the glow of a television screen in 1985, that mischievous grin, the leather jacket, the skateboard tucked under one arm. They know his laugh, quick and bright like a match being struck. They think they understand what he represents. Youth, possibility, the electric feeling that the future is yours if you're fast enough to grab it. But what they don't know, what the cameras could never fully capture, is what it cost him. What still costs him? Every single morning. What does it mean to be the symbol of a generation's optimism when your own body has declared war on you? What do you do when the disease that is stealing your stillness also tries to steal your voice, and you refuse, absolutely refuse, to go quiet? And here's the question that might keep you watching until the very last word. Was the greatest role Michael J. Fox ever played not Marty McFly, not Alex P. Keaton, but the man he chose to become after everything was taken? His name is synonymous with a kind of golden hour magic. But magic, as anyone who has looked closely at it knows, is rarely what it appears. He was born Michael Andrew Fox on June 9th, 1961, in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, into a family that had very little money and a great deal of love, which, if you've had to choose, you know is the better bargain. His father, Bill Fox, was a career soldier in the Canadian Army, which meant that the family moved constantly, pulling up roots before they'd had time to settle, packing life into cardboard boxes and reassembling it in a different city, on a different street, in a different school, where Michael was always the new kid, always the smallest in the class, always the one who had to figure out very quickly how to make people like him. This is where it began. Not the disease, not the fame, but the instinct for performance. When you're perpetually new, when you're always the outsider pressing your face against the glass of an established social world, you learn to entertain your way inside. You learn to be funny. You learn to read a room the way a sailor reads weather, instinctively, urgently, with survival in mind. Michael Fox learned this lesson so thoroughly that it became indistinguishable from who he was. He was not performing when he made people laugh. He was doing the only thing that had ever felt completely natural. His mother, Phyllis, was warm and grounded and fiercely devoted to her 5 children. She was the kind of woman who filled a house with a specific quality of ordinariness that Michael would later describe with something close to reverence. The smell of dinner cooking, the sound of the television in the next room, the particular safety of a home where everyone is accounted for. For a boy who spent his childhood in temporary houses in temporary towns, his mother's consistency was the fixed point around which everything else orbited. By the time the family settled in Burnaby, British Columbia, Michael was a teenager with big dreams and a small television in his bedroom. He watched it the way other kids watch sports, studying the rhythms of sitcoms, absorbing the timing of jokes, feeling in his gut the precise moment a scene turned. He was 14 when he first auditioned for a local production, 17 when he appeared in the Canadian television series Leo and Me, and 18 when he made a decision that must have felt to his working-class family like stepping off a cliff in the dark. He moved to Los Angeles with almost no money, sharing a tiny apartment with a friend, eating mustard sandwiches, not as a metaphor, as an actual fact, and going to auditions during the day and watching the city from his window at night, learning its language, its rhythms, its particular brand of indifference toward the hopeful and the young. He was so broke that he sold his furniture piece by piece to buy groceries. He was so broke that he considered giving up and going home. And this is the part that matters. He didn't. But before the miracle came, there was the wound. Not all wounds leave visible marks. Some of them are made of silence and distance, and the slow accumulation of small moments that carve out a hollow place inside you. For Michael, one of those hollows was dug by his father. Bill Fox was not a cruel man. He was a veteran, a disciplined man of his era, someone who expressed love through provision rather than words, through showing up rather than speaking up. But Michael was a boy who needed words. He needed to be told that his dreams made sense, that his desire to stand on a stage and make people feel something was not foolishness or vanity, but was, in fact, a legitimate way to live a life. And that validation was slow in coming, quiet in its arrival, like a letter that reached you a year after it was sent. There's a specific pain in loving a parent whose approval feels perpetually just out of reach. Not because they don't love you, but because they can't quite translate that love into the language you most need to hear. Michael has spoken about his father with enormous tenderness, and that tenderness is the truest testament to what it cost him to hold on to love through the silence. He carried that ache quietly, the way children do. He turned it into fuel. He turned it into the hunger that sent him to Los Angeles, that kept him eating mustard sandwiches instead of going home, that made him knock on one more door when every instinct said the doors were done opening for today. This wound shaped him in ways he probably wouldn't have chosen, but ways that made him who he became. The need to be seen, the compulsion to make people laugh, the fierce, almost irrational optimism that he would carry even into the darkest chapters of his life. And those dark chapters were coming. Darker than anyone watching Family Ties or Back to the Future could have imagined. Darker than the brightest star of a generation had any right to expect. The year was 1991. Michael J. Fox was 30 years old. He had achieved everything a person from Burnaby, British Columbia, could have dreamed, starring roles in two of the most beloved film franchises of the decade, a television career that had made him the face of a generation, a family he loved, a life that looked, from the outside, like evidence that the American dream was real and available and fair. He was on the set of Doc Hollywood in Gainesville, Florida, in the early hours of the morning when he noticed something. His left pinky finger was trembling, not shaking from cold, not twitching from nerves, but moving on its own in a small, involuntary rhythm that he could not control. He looked at it the way you look at something that doesn't make sense, with the particular confusion of a person who does not yet understand that their world is being quietly rearranged. He told himself it was exhaustion. He had been working at a pace that would have destroyed most people. Film roles, television episodes, a new marriage, a newborn son, the relentless maintenance of a public image that demanded he always appear energetic, always appear capable, always appear like a man who had everything under control. The finger would stop. He would rest. It would be fine that IT was not fine. The tremor spread. His movements became less fluid. His body began to betray him in ways that were small enough to hide, but large enough to terrify. He went to a doctor in 1991. The doctor referred him to a neurologist. And the neurologist, in the flat, careful language of medical professionals delivering information that will change a life, told a 30-year-old man at the peak of his career that he had Parkinson's disease. Parkinsons, a progressive, degenerative neurological disorder with no cure. A thief that does its work slowly, methodically, stealing motor control in increments, leaving the mind completely intact while gradually dismantling the body's ability to respond to it. The neurologist told him that in 10 years, he would likely be unable to work. 10 years. Michael was 30 years old. He sat with that information alone for a long time. This is the part that very few people have fully reckoned with, the solitude of those early years after diagnosis. He did not tell his family. He did not tell his colleagues. He did not tell the studios, the producers, the network executives who were depending on him. He put on his face every morning, the grin, the spark, the electricity that the world had paid handsomely to see. And he went to work, and he kept the secret the way you keep a wound covered, pressing the bandage down harder when it starts to bleed through. He was doing this, carrying the secret, carrying the diagnosis, carrying the weight of a future that had just changed shape entirely, while simultaneously drinking. Heavily, privately, using alcohol to manage the anxiety and the grief and the terror that he had no other outlet for. He became, in those years, someone who was performing two parallel lives simultaneously. The luminous public self that the world adored, and a frightened private self who was drinking alone in hotel rooms and trying to understand how to survive what was happening inside his own body. This is the lowest point. Not the diagnosis itself, but the years after, the hiding, the self-medication, the silence, the performance of wellness while drowning. The years when Michael J. Fox, the symbol of boyish American optimism, was sitting alone in the dark with a disease in one hand and a drink in the other, and the world had no idea he could have stayed there. This is not a small thing to acknowledge. He could have gone the way that grief and fear and addiction can take you quietly and completely into a place from which return is not guaranteed. But something happened. Or rather, something didn't happen. He didn't disappear. His wife, Tracy Pollan, found out. Not through a confession, but through the accumulating evidence of a marriage lived in close proximity. The tremors that were harder to hide at home. The drinking that couldn't be contained to hotel rooms forever. The weight of a secret that was too large for one person to carry without it showing. And Tracy, whom Michael had met on the set of Family Ties in 1985 and married in 1988, did not run. She did not recoil. She sat with him in it. This matters. This matters so much that it deserves a moment of stillness. Because the decision Michael made next, the decision to get sober, to face the disease, to tell the truth, was not made in isolation. It was made in the context of being loved by someone who looked at him clearly, who saw all of it, and who stayed. Tracy was the mirror that showed him what he actually looked like when he was hiding. And what he looked like was someone who was wasting the time. He got sober in 1992. He attended Alcoholics Anonymous. He did the hard, unglamorous, daily work of choosing not to drink when every nervous system in his body was suggesting that it would help. He will tell you, and has told you, in his memoirs and his interviews and his public advocacy, that sobriety was not the easy part. It was the necessary part. The part without which nothing else was possible. And then, in 1998, 7 years after the diagnosis, he went public. The announcement landed like a stone in still water, the ripples spreading outward in every direction. The world was shocked, not because they had expected to be lied to, but because the lie had been so complete, so seamlessly sustained, that they had never thought to question it. The man with the grin, the man with the spark, the man who was the embodiment of everything fast and bright and possible. He had Parkinson's disease. He had had it for 7 years. He had worked through all of it, had raised children through all of it, had built a public life through all of it, and none of them had known. The response was, by most measures, astonishing in its warmth. People did not turn away. People leaned in. There is something in human nature, perhaps the truest, best thing in human nature, that responds to an honest wound with something approaching reverence. Michael had been beloved as a star. He became something different after 1998. He became real, but the announcement was not an ending. It was a beginning that in 2000, he established the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research, which would become the largest nonprofit funder of Parkinson's research in the world. This is not a minor thing. This is an organization that has, as of the time of this script, raised and invested more than $2 billion into research aimed at ending the disease that is trying to end him. $2 billion. Channeled from the place where his fear lived, turned into something that might one day mean that another 30-year-old in a neurologist's office will receive different news. Think about that. Take a moment and actually think about it. He found out he was sick, and his response, eventually, after the grief and the alcohol and the hiding, was to build the largest machine in the world aimed at curing what was killing him. This is not something that happens by accident. This is something that happens when a person decides, with full awareness of what it costs, to use their pain as a compass rather than a cage. He continued to act. He appeared on Spin City, for which he won a Golden Globe in 2000. He returned to television repeatedly, in The Good Wife, in Boston Legal, in guest roles and recurring arcs that required him to negotiate with his body every single day, to choreograph his movements and his timing around symptoms that did not cooperate with the demands of a production schedule. He was not doing this to prove something to the world. He was doing it because the work was part of who he was, and who he was not something Parkinson's was entitled to take. His personal life, through all of this, has been anchored by Tracy and by the 4 children they raised together, Sam, the twins Aquina and Skylar, and Esme. He has written about fatherhood with a specificity and a tenderness that makes you feel you are standing in the rooms where it happened. The birthday parties, the school plays, the conversations with children who grew up watching their father fight a disease without flinching and who became, As a result, people with a specific gravity, a specific understanding of what it means to be alive, and to choose how to use that aliveness. Michael has spoken about faith, not in the institutional sense, not in the language of doctrine, but in the earthier, more personal sense of a man who has had to decide, repeatedly and often painfully, what he believes about the universe he inhabits. He does not believe in being angry at his diagnosis. This is not naivety. This is a position he arrived at through enormous effort, through the daily practice of choosing a relationship with his life that is built on gratitude rather than resentment. He once said that he wakes up every morning and the first thing he has to do is feel grateful for the day. Not because it's easy, because it's the only way to live. There is something in this that transcends the particulars of his story and speaks to something older and more universal. The Buddhist teachers talk about impermanence, about the folly of building your identity on conditions that will inevitably change. Michael J. Fox built his identity on speed, on youth, on the electric crackle of physical presence, and then watched all of those things be taken from him by millimeters, year by year. And he rebuilt, not the same thing, something different, something that does not depend on the things that can be lost. In his 2020 memoir, No Time Like the Future, he wrote with rare honesty about the progression of the disease, about a spinal injury in 2018 that required major surgery and sent him into a period of profound darkness, about the moments when optimism itself felt like a performance he could no longer sustain. This is the part of his story that the inspirational narrative tends to skip, the moments when even the most resilient person hits a wall and does not immediately bounce back. He hit that wall. He sat with it. He told the truth about it in print, which is its own kind of courage. But he came back to making the foundation his work, his purpose, his reason to be in rooms and conversations and laboratories where the science of Parkinson's was being pushed forward. He came back to Tracy. He came back to the version of himself that had decided, years ago, that the disease was not going to have the last word. Now he is 64. The tremors are more visible. The symptoms are more pronounced. He walks differently than he once did, and he speaks with the particular deliberateness of a man who has made peace with what his body requires of him. He still laughs. That has not changed. The laugh is still there, still quick, still bright, still like a match being struck. There's a skateboard somewhere, whether literal or figurative, whether rusting in a garage or living as an image in the cultural memory of everyone who saw Back to the Future, that stands for everything he was at the beginning. Fast, reckless, certain, invincible in the specific way that only the very young and the very unaware can be invincible, that he is not that anymore, that he is something better. He is a man who found out the worst thing that could happen and decided to do something with it that was larger than himself. He is a man whose foundation has funded over $2 billion in research. He is a man who stayed sober through decades of difficulty. He is a man who was loved by the same woman through all of it. He is a man who raised children who know what it means to face something hard without pretending it is easy. He is a man who, when asked about optimism, says something like this: "It is not about expecting good things to happen. It is about accepting what is happening and deciding to engage with it fully anyway." That is the philosophy. That is the legacy. Not the movies, not the awards, not the leather jacket and the skateboard. The legacy is the decision made daily to be present for the life you actually have rather than the one you were expecting. And now I want to speak to you directly because this story is not really just about him. It is about something you already know, something you might be in the middle of right now, something you might have just come through or be standing at the edge of. You have had something taken from you. Everyone who makes it past a certain age has had something taken, a health, a person, a version of the future that felt certain, a version of yourself that felt permanent. And the taking is real, and the grief is real, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. But here is what Michael J. Fox's life asks of you, quietly, without preaching, without the language of motivational posters or inspirational Instagram accounts. It asks, what will you do with the thing that was taken? Not immediately, not before you've grieved it properly, Not before you've sat in the dark with it long enough to understand its shape. But eventually, when you are ready, when the grief has burned down enough to reveal what's underneath, what will you build in the space where the old thing used to be? Think about that skateboard. Think about the kid who rode it fast and certain into a life that had no idea what was coming. Think about the man he became after the diagnosis, after the years of hiding, after the sobriety, after the announcement, after the foundation, after the surgery, after the wall, after all of it. He is still riding, except now the ride looks different. Now the ride is slower and harder and more deliberate. And somehow, it seems to matter more. You're watching this because something in you recognized something in him. Maybe you're facing your own diagnosis, your own silence, your own thing you're carrying without telling anyone. Maybe you're watching someone you love carry theirs. Maybe you are just a person who needed, today, to be reminded that the people who make meaning from difficulty are not special people. They are ordinary people who made a specific choice. The choice is available to you. Right now, today, in whatever room you're sitting in, whatever weight is on your chest, whatever future you have had to revise. Michael J. Fox is 64 years old. He wakes up every morning with a disease that has no cure. He wakes up and, by his own account, the first thing he does is find something to be grateful for. Then he gets up. Then he gets to work, and the skateboard, that image, that symbol of everything that youth believes about its own permanence, it is still there. Not on the ground where it used to be, moving fast and certain. It is somewhere quieter now, but it is still his. And the question it asks, the question it has always asked is this: how fast are you willing to go toward the life that is actually waiting for you?